Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Hope, for putting this all together, and the Liberty Museum and Art Center. Thank you for hosting this powerful project that means so much to my family and I. Growing up, I know the flyer says that it's we're a branch of the Grossinger family, which is very true. But that's not really what we're going to talk about. We're very grateful to the Grossingers. Harry Grossinger, a cousin of my grandfather, did sponsor my grandmother, and at that time, my 1-year-old mother, who was born in a displaced persons camp in Italy in 1940. I'm not going to say the year. I was just about to say the year. I know. And yeah, they came to this country when she was 1 year old. So yeah, my grandparents were like a second family to me. I saw them almost every day, and other survivors. There was a bunch of survivors that settled in Liberty that I knew growing up. They were like a second family to me and to us. And yeah, it was something that never was talked about. It was something that was very shamed. There was a lot of shame and pain about being survivors, and it just wasn't talked about. And so when Hope talked about, put out there that she's doing this project, I thought to myself, it's time. It's time for their voices to be brought out there. So this is going to be a family affair. My brother will start off, Raphael, and he'll start off by reading some of the stories. There are on display stories of survivors that settled right here in Liberty in their own words, most of them in their own words. My grandparents, there was a little third party, but they were interviewed. And the collage of my grandparents and different other survivors that settled right here in Liberty. So my brother will start off reading the stories, and then my mother, Sheila, will talk about her experiences with the trials and tribulations of growing up as a second-generation survivor. And then I will give a tribute. I wrote this tribute years ago on Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I revised it for you all. And about the wisdom and the lessons that I learned from reading these stories, from retyping them up. There's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of truth in them. So, yeah, without further ado, here's my brother.
Sam was a student in Krakow when the Germans invaded Poland in 1939. He and a group of friends ran away and traveled hundreds of miles on foot. They were caught by the Germans at the border between Russia and Poland, were chased back to Krakow to be interred in Pluszowo, a labor camp. According to Sam, the Poles were the most anti-Semitic people. Sam claims that Germans couldn't have accomplished in any place what they accomplished in Poland because of how the Poles felt about the Jews. There were many Polish Jews in Germany, and 20,000 of them were gathered up on Kristallnacht and shipped to Poland, were not admitted by the Polish people. In Pluszowo, the prisoners were set to hard labor, cutting stones with a sledgehammer. Many did not survive. Sam and a few others organized an escape into the woods, and after almost 2 years of hiding and traveling, finally crossed over to Russia, only to be sent by the Russians to a concentration camp. When the war came to an end in 1945, the organized Polish resistance movement released them and brought them back to Poland. There they were greeted with stones, and they found that none of their families had survived. So again, they started running from the border, from border to border. While passing through Austria, they were in a refugee camp, which had been a concentration camp. And there they saw stacks of children's shoes and toys, and all that remained of children that had been slaughtered there. The Joint Distribution Committee helped Sam and Lottie to get to Napoli. The committee contacted Harry Grossinger, who made donations to the committee and paved the way for Sam and Lottie to come to the U.S. Sam and Lottie met in Italy in 1946, were married there, and brought their daughter Sheila, who was a couple of months old, to the U.S. Now for Lottie, Lottie was living in Szczecin in Poland as a teenager when Germany invaded Poland. In the year 1939, the Jews in her village were not permitted to use their synagogue and did their praying in the attics. Jews were molested by the Germans if they ventured out on the streets. Lottie recalls seeing an elderly Jew whose beard was pulled and his tallis and clothing torn by the hooligans. He was very seriously injured. After some time, the Germans left and the Russians arrived. The Russians were less severe in their treatment of the Jews, and in fact recommended the Jews follow them out of Poland when the Germans returned. Many Jews did follow the Russians. What their fate was, no one seemed to know. When the Germans returned, they began burning the synagogues, of which there were 5 in that small village. 4 were burned completely. 1, their newest and most magnificent, could not be completely destroyed. At that time, the non-Jewish Polish residents joined in the attacks on the Jews, stealing from them, destroying their property, maiming and killing the Jews who had been their neighbors. It is also to be noted the number of camps that were built in Poland to speed the extermination of the Jews. Lottie, during that period, kept on the move to avoid being caught. Her parents disappeared and obviously were victims of one of these camps. She was separated from her brothers and sisters and did not learn for years where they were or even whether they had survived. She escaped to Austria, where she met her future husband, Sam, who was also on the run. They escaped to Italy, where they were married, and then came to the U.S. Lottie had great difficulty telling her story because the memories that came to her affected her emotionally. Her description of the kind of food that was available and the rags that they wore in summer and winter and being forced to do manual labor under the most terrible conditions makes one wonder how anyone survived. Lottie helped to save a brother and sister by influencing an officer to permit them to get away. Her bribe consisted of the few pieces of bread she was able to hoard from her own meager supply. Such memories, unfortunately, never completely leave you. So as my sister Pearl alluded to, those stories were taken down from interviews with my grandparents. We do have a firsthand account from a friend of theirs here in Liberty, Frida Yukubitz, who I'm happy to share this first-person account. When the war broke out, I was 18 or 19 years old. I was living in Poland with my mother and sister. My older sister and brother were married. They lived in the same building. I was the youngest. We didn't need much luxury. We were happy when we had a dress for Shabbat and challah and chicken. It wasn't an easy life in Poland. When they saw a Jew with a beard, they began throwing stones at him. We were used to it before the war. The Russians took over Poland, including Galicia, where I live, in 1939. Before the Russians came, it was bad, but we could live with it. When the Russians came, it was a little worse. We had to stay in line for food and materials. Life wasn't easy. Finally, in 1941, the Russians had to run away, and the Germans took over. One time I stayed in the streets, and a Polak riding a bicycle said, "The Jews are invading the village behind us." This was propaganda. They took a Jew in a wagon with bells, cut his beard till he bled, and made him ride through the villages. The people from my town grabbed any shovel or whatever they could to go and kill Jews. My cousin owned a small country store. They killed him. My brother-in-law hid in the attic, so he escaped. They just broke all the windows in our house, but we were lucky to survive. They took away from us all our food, potatoes, and corn prepared for the winter. They gave us a little shack to live in, and we had to go to slave work, field work, farm work, and not get paid for it. In my village, we survived because some people still had a heart. They tried to put us to slave work. We had our property, cows, chickens, geese, and our homes taken away. I took my older sister to my brother's home in another town. I didn't look Jewish. Maybe that was my luck. I went back to the village to get my mother and took her to my brother. In 1942, my mother and I were staying with my brother during Yom Kippur. It didn't take long. On Sukkot, they took my mother away and sent her to the Belzutz crematorium. We didn't have any mail. We were cut off from the world. The only way I knew what was going on was when someone told us. The field work was then over, so my slave work was over. So we were chased out to the ghetto in Tlutza. God helped me through the whole year. I still had both sisters and their children. I came to the ghetto in fall and moved into my aunt's house. In that winter, 42 to 43, there was a typhus epidemic. People were dying like flies. I got typhus and my sister's children got it. Doctor came to the house to check. The doctor saw the black blemishes on my stomach. He gave up on me. My sister started crying. I told her, what does he know? And I started to get better. Some Christian sent me a piece of Christmas cake and milk. My body was as black as mud. You had to carry the little water we had into the house. My skin burned from the fever. We all recovered from the typhus. I was the family breadwinner. I was the pigeon carrier for bread, potatoes, and flour, so we could survive. I used to go to the village every week for it. I couldn't be sick. I had an obligation to my family. In the spring, in another village, there opened a place that needed help. I wasn't well enough to work. I was about 15 miles from the ghetto. My sister went to work. My sister was more precious to me than life. I went to release my sister. I told her to go to the village on Wednesday to get the food for the family. On Thursday morning, there was a pogrom, and she and my whole family were killed. I was left with one remaining sister and one of her daughters. On Sunday, I went home to see what was what. I found my one sister and her daughter. I asked her to stay with me. She said if we separate, maybe one of us will live. Life didn't mean anything to us. Next week, there was another pogrom, and they were both killed. I was left all alone. Wherever I went, I found Polish people who liked me and felt pity on me. They gave me a little water and a little food. Then they warned me to run away. I ran to the woods and lived on berries for a few days. I then found some Jewish people and went to volunteer on a farm to work and found a girlfriend I grew up with and her family. I went back to the village to pick up some clothes. I stopped at a colony, a few houses in a field. She said, I have a proposition for you. There's a fellow who lost his wife and he will give you papers if you will stay there and raise his children. I didn't want to do it. I felt that after a while I would have my own child with him, and I ran away. When I got back to the camp, there was a pogrom and I was shot. They left me naked for dead. Where they took us to shoot us, they took 6 people at a time. Then came a big shower, after which I was awakened and saw the blood running out. I got up and went about 50 feet under a barn, blacked out, and fell in the woods. From the droppings from the roof, I saw a shadow of a person. 2 10-year-old boys were in the field. They saw me. I brought them a message from beyond from their parents. When I saw these boys a few years ago, they told me about the message. I don't remember that happened. The people came here from the village to bury the dead. The Germans had left. A woman bought me a skirt and a sheet and something to eat. I was still bleeding. A Ukrainian man saved my life. He made bandages from a sheet. He washed my wounds. People would look at me like the second Jesus because I came alive from the dead. People brought me bread and milk, and I sold butter and started to make money. I was in a working camp, and people used to come and just look at me. The Ukrainian man told me to get the borax cream, and that would heal me. My bone in my arm was crushed. My muscles were cut. I was white from loss of blood. The Ukrainian man helped me a lot. In 2 months, I healed, and then I had to leave, and I went back to my village. My brother found me. He told me to take his wife and child. The Christian I was staying with took the horse and sled and went about 20 miles to get them. If he was caught, everyone would have been killed. My sister-in-law and child were half dead. We were together. It didn't take long until the Russians came back and we were liberated. To this day, it was a big struggle. The end of my story is that I have 2 beautiful daughters and a granddaughter. I was lucky to live and bring 2 children to life and survive today.
She went to she was 101 years old. She just passed away 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay, I want to preface my remarks by saying that I grew up in a family that never talked about their Holocaust experiences during the war. If the subject was ever mentioned, it brought tears to their eyes. So I learned early on to not bring it up again or ask any questions. Tina reminded me when she said that, as opposed to Ariel, whose parents talked about it all. And I'm dying to know who your grandparents dictated that to. That,
Lillian typed it out.
Yeah, I heard that from Lois, that she's been looking for that. Those copies, Okay. Anyway. In a week, it will be 75 years since my family and I came to this country, a week before my first birthday. My parents had been in a displaced persons camp in Bari, Italy, after the war. The only story I heard about that time was my mother was very depressed and spent a lot of time in bed. Other women basically fed me and took care of me. My father had a cousin living in the States named Harry Grossinger, who was married to the matriarch of the famous Grossinger Hotel, Jenny. He agreed to sponsor our entry into this country. It is my understanding that people would only be allowed in this country if they had someone who promised that they would not become a burden to the state. So after a long boat ride, they arrived in New York and ended up at Grossinger Hotel. Harry gave my father a job and a room for the three of us to live in. We stayed there about 3 years until my mother became pregnant with my brother, at which time they rented an apartment in Liberty. A few years later, they bought that house. During this time, most of their friends were also Europeans who had experienced the Holocaust in their various countries. My parents were from Poland, but their friends were from Czechoslovakia, Germany, Russia, and probably other countries I don't remember. The children of my parents' friends became my friends as well. Between my parents and their friends and children, I also never heard anything spoken about their experiences in Europe during the war. Some of the anecdotes I heard over the years was my father ran to Russia while hiding in the woods. I guess that was confirmed by my son. And my mother helped her only surviving brother and sister relocate to Israel. My father's entire family had been killed during the war. I had seen a picture of them, but knew nothing of my mother's family who had perished. I got to meet my aunt and uncle and their children in Israel when I was in my 20s, and they came here afterwards as a few times to stay with us, but I still knew nothing of their experiences. I obviously grew up without grandparents, but somehow my parents knew how to grandparent, and they were really very great with my children. And they still remember that to this day. My school years were problematic for me. I didn't fit in with the upper middle class Jewish kids who always wore the most stylish clothes, and the Gentile kids didn't want anything to do with me. My parents spoke with an accent, and their culture was very different than anyone else I knew. So I never invited people over, other kids over. I was very embarrassed of their different ways. I spent most of my weekends at Grossinger's Hotel and participated in various activities. It might sound glamorous, but I hated it. I just wanted to be a regular kid. I now believe this not fitting in carried into my adult life. I frequently find myself making excuses for taking up space on the planet. Someone might bump into me and I would apologize. I've often thought this must be how the Jews living in Europe felt when it was known everyone wanted to annihilate them. As I was growing up, I had no interest in what was going on during the war in Europe. It just seemed just no interest of mine. But as I've gotten older, I can't get enough information on World War II. I read and watch everything I can. And with some of the things going on in the world today, it brings everything front and center and is very scary. I wish my parents were alive today so I could bring up some of these subjects that I was too afraid to as a child and get to know them as total human beings. I guess I could open it up to questions or whatever, but I just want to say, before I do that, I want to say that Dina will also be joining us, joining our family, and she doesn't know this, but she was probably the only one, as I was growing up and into my 20s and 30s, that I ever mentioned the Holocaust with. because I knew that she had similar experiences. And, whether, our kids went to Hebrew school together, I would see her at her husband's medical office. I'd run into her in the store. It was always a subject that came up, and it really was validating to me, and I really enjoyed that. And she is going to be speaking after my
share poem.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if that's
so. And also, I guess I should open it up to questions, but everybody else has been asking really great questions, and I'm not smart enough to answer them. So if anyone has a comment or anything, or I'll probably send one of my kids will probably answer the question. So anyone have anything you want to say or comment, John, or ask? Yes, Linda.
First of all, you are able to answer the questions. Second of all, you have always been and always will be more than enough. And you know that.
You can send me the bill later.
I prefer cash.
That works. You like your hand up.
Yeah, but you talked about the discrepancy between your maybe upbringing or social status and the upper middle class. Is how you described it? Were those people who had moved here, there were further generations away from European experience?
Yeah, they definitely were at least third or fourth generation Americans.
Right.
Today it's quite different, because my kids went to school here, and it's not that way. But when I was growing up in the 60s and late 50s, I'll deny it if you say it. That's the way it was. It was very, there wasn't much intermingling. Today, I don't, among, let's say, the Jews and the Gentiles. Today, it's hardly anyone knows. Everybody's together. Different races, different religions. It just seems like it. But at the time, these are kids of doctors and lawyers, and, my parents were neither. So I just felt it. I don't know how much of it was my stuff, but, that was my experience growing up.
I think that most of us who grew up in that period experienced very much the same thing, even though there was a big difference between, and I assume these were German Jewish families who had emigrated much earlier, and Shtetl Jews, as we were called.
It seemed like there were families that were, I guess, smarter or had more resources than my family did, and saw the things brewing and got out of Europe. But, there were lots that just didn't have the resources to do that, such as my parents, and, so.
Just think what it would take for you to today, anybody here sitting would have to leave their home right now. How easy would it be? How long would you wait?
Exactly. Something I thought about a lot. I hope none of us here ever have to have to deal with that. But, you don't know. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought some of the things I'm, seeing on college campuses, et cetera, could come to be, but just a lot of things there. I promised myself I wasn't going to get political, so I'll stop there. Anyone else? Yes.
What started? Where does all the hatred come from and why? What started this?
People that are different than us, we don't understand, and we want to be surrounded by people that are like us, whose cultures we know, who dress like we do, etc. That's just, there's always been a group that's been the target of hatred, I believe. So, That's kind of negative to say, but I do believe that. So, anything else? Yes, Lois.
I just want to say, having known your parents, they're very lovely people. And I'm
Thank
glad
you.
I got to know them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I thank you for having the stories that Lillian had told me. So you can share them.
Yeah.
These are people I knew. And I never knew any of what had happened to me.
I know, when I first got that, I don't remember how I got it or how I came in possession of it, but I did read a lot of, maybe the whole booklet, but things that you were reading, I forgot about. I would have gone back to research it it wasn't my story anyway, so it wouldn't matter, but yeah, I know. Your mother was always such a dear also. I don't remember your father that well, but your mother used to play mahjong with her. And
They were sisters together.
I didn't hear what you said.
They were members of the Pythian sisters, the local Pythian sisters.
Pythian.
Yeah,
Yeah, they belonged to that club, right?
that's right.
Yeah, my mother was always loved to join these clubs and everything, so.
Our sister.
Yeah. Yes. Hi, how are you?
I came in a little late. Could you please, I think I know who your parents were. Could you please tell me their names?
Lottie and Sam Grossinger.
And I also knew them very well from shul, from the synagogue, and they were the loveliest people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very nice to see you there to represent them.
Thank you. I do feel, even though I'm scared, she had to bring me kicking and screaming, but I'm here and I'm glad I'm here, so.
I forgot to introduce Dana earlier. Dana will be saying a poem, and David Gordon is also here, who spoke earlier. They're both second generation survivors that settled in Liberty. So yeah, my take on my experience was very different. There's no doubt that the horrors of the Holocaust had, seeped out in generations that follow. But yeah, there was a lot of wisdom especially in retyping these stories. I really had to get deep into them, and there's definitely a lot of emotional healing going on, and a lot of wisdom that came forth. So I highly recommend you reading these stories if you get a chance. One in particular from Zipporah Miller, who was one of my grandma's best friends. She talked about in her stories that one of the radical youth Aliyah leaders was beaten by the Nazis till he was left invalid. And then he told Zipporah later, he said to the Nazi goons, quote unquote, "You can break me to pieces, but it is you who will die." And this really, really touched me. What was he talking about? What part of him would die? Something that separated him from the physical and the non-physical. There was something else that was there that I would call the spark that can never die. This will be a tribute to my greatest inspirations, to two of the bravest warriors I know, to two courageous yet fragile soldiers that overcame unfathomable inhumanity. It's a tribute to Sam and Lottie Grossinger, or who I would refer to as Grandma and Grandpa. There was one thing that I could always count on when I was a child. That was the safety, warmth, and comfort of your home. Whether it was Friday night Shabbos dinners, the annual New Year's Eve sleepovers, or after school time eating macaroni and cottage cheese while watching Alvin and the Chipmunks, this was the one place I felt safe, the one place I truly felt I could always call home. No matter what the day brought, you always looked at the three of your grandchildren with such love, with such adoration, with such sparkle in your eyes. That sparkle is what I would call love. No matter what happened at school that day, I could always count on that sparkle to lift me up. That sparkle that would never go away. That sparkle that could not fade. You had undergone such astronomical devastation, lost almost your entire families, when just in your teens in unfathomable ways. The Nazis tried, but they could not tear you down. That sparkle remained. Almost your entire house burned to ashes in a horrific fire decades later. The house you raised a beautiful family in, the house that was your rocks in this country, the only house you knew. I can only imagine how this experience must have felt like you were reliving the terrors of the concentration camps. But did you let this bring you down? Nope. Your spirit couldn't be torn down. You only built back up that same house like it never happened, only seemingly bigger and brighter than ever before. And yet, you still have that sparkle in your eyes. Even grandma getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's, having a stroke, and being in a coma for 15 years couldn't knock you guys down or tear you apart. Grandpa, you would still have that sparkle in your eyes as you would visit grandma regularly. Nothing, and I mean nothing, could withstand the one force that you guys had and that remains to this day in the generations that followed. That one force that only grew stronger through all the challenges you've undergone, all the inhumanity, all the torture, the one force that could move mountains if it had to. And that force was the power of the heart. The love that you both shared with each other and through the lives that you created was unlike anything I've ever seen or even heard of. You have showed me that bullies can never win. They can never tear us down, try to take away our families and friends, but the power of the heart is insurmountable and will remain intact long after the bullies have their say. You have showed me the true definition of faith, how your entire family can be wiped away for their religion, but your faith always remained. Your belief system was so strong and firm that it could not be swayed or faltered. You have showed me time and time again that when people try to tear you down, it instead helped you rise. It helps your heart grow stronger. You demonstrated what true perseverance is as you underwent the most trying of storms. Most importantly, you have demonstrated to all of us who knew you that through everything, all the challenges that life throws at us, all the zigs and zags of the journey, the one thing that remains through it all is love. It's that glimmering sparkle in your eyes, that sparkle that could not fade, that sparkle that spread throughout generations to come. To this day, you two remain my rocks, my inspiration, my guides, and I will be forever grateful and inspired by you. I am honored to be part of your clan and love that you brought forth to this nation. I love you. Thank you.
Wow.
When I said yes to this project, I'm going to school right now to be a clinical mental health counselor. And that same week that I gave a yes, we learned about logotherapy, which is a theory in mental health counseling that brings the meaning of life to mental health, purpose. The creator, the founder of logotherapy was Viktor Frankl, He was a Holocaust survivor who went into the concentration camps when he was 37 years old. He used to be there doing these crazy, tough labor, and he would just notice the sunsets and just view the sunsets and just how beautiful they were. And he really soaked that in. And then he wrote a book in his head, a book that would be published soon after he escaped from the camps. And that book would go on to develop this theory of mental health counseling, logotherapy. And I just want to finish with a quote from him. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Thank you. Dina, who will come up, who I grew up, she was at synagogue every Saturday. Her kids would go to Hebrew school with us. Yeah, it was very, just have such love for her. And so grateful that she's here. And then followed, David will say a few words, right? Right, David? Okay. Well.
Thank you. Thank you, Pearl. Thank you, Sheila, Raphael, Taya. I'm going to read a poem that I wrote a long time ago. Like Sheila, parents never talked about their experiences. It would fall out of their mouth on occasion when there was a yard site, when there were relatives that came, and we squeezed in another 4 people in a 3-room apartment. There were other people that my parents, we called them relatives, but they weren't. We were common in our experiences. And as Sheila described, there was a major difference between our homes and those of our 2nd and 3rd generation aunts, uncles that may have been in this country before us. The names of the dead were read. Who will cry and weep? For those that were there, but they're nearly all asleep. History will attempt to file it deep. Forget it. Attribute it to one creep. But for those that were there, life cannot be so cheap. Absolved of the memory, we deem the deaths to be in vain. A harvest to reap, again, mayhap, while we're there. Surprised, again, by the ferocity of the feet. As the new flames roar and leap, spreading ever faster, only drops will seep, again to quench at the inferno. The same care as given before, a muted peep. I read this in the memory of my grandmother, Dina, my grandfather, Joseph, my grandmother, Paula, my great aunts and uncles, and the entire family and cousins of Kale, Israel. My display is back there. I have 2 books with the names of 200 of our extended family members. Great aunts and uncles, my parents' cousins, my mother-in-law's cousins, a few. She had a fantastically large family, my husband's family. I just found out about my grandmother, Paula. For 70 years, no one knew her disposition. But on a blog of a gentleman who was looking up his grandmother in England, he printed a page that he wrote up in his blog of the people that were on the same train to take them from Germany to their death. And on that paragraph, where his grandmother was in a third-class compartment that the Nazis allowed her to pay 3 times the amount of marks. By the way, they charged everyone they round up 5 marks to get in the cattle car. This gentleman who wrote the blog, his grandmother paid 15 marks to be in a third-class compartment and locked in, to go to her same disposition as mine. And in the paragraph was my grandmother's name. In the paragraph above it was the cousin of my father, his wife and son. Their daughter was on a kinder transplant. She died 2 months ago. She didn't know about this until just before she died. And a lower paragraph, in that same paragraph, was Dr. Joseph Waldner, who was my husband's cousin. I invite you to look at the pages. There have been many Holocausts before and ongoing now. And the idea is not to forget them, nor to have another occur. Thank you.
David Gordon, who's another second-generation survivor.
I didn't prepare anything for today. But the reason I wanted to say something is because I was raised in their house, Lottie and Sam's house. My godparents were the Friedmans, the Grossingers. They managed the hotel. And I don't know the background of it because, like most of you, my parents didn't talk much about anything to me about how things worked and about the Holocaust. But from my understanding is the Friedmans got their papers for one of them or helped them get jobs, and they decided to make them my godparents. But really, my godparents was Lottie and Sam. Because my parents, maybe because of the Holocaust, were ill their whole life. And I ended up being alone because they were both in the hospital at the same time. Sam and Lottie saved me and raised me. And so did Sheila. I'll never forget that. So that's why I'm up here talking today, is to thank Sam and Lottie for all the things they did for me when I was growing up. And I had the same experience as Sheila did in the 70s. I didn't have Puma sneakers or Lee jeans or Jordache like some of the other kids did when I first, went to school. And background on my Holocaust experience is that my father's family was murdered in Riga, outside of Riga. His parents, my grandparents were killed. My uncle was killed. There were 3 brothers. 2 of them survived. One was my father, and the other one was Benyo, who went to Israel. And he had 3 daughters, my cousins, who are Israelis. So I'm feeling it now too, all over again, what happened recently in the news. And my mother's parents were murdered, and she was raised by the Catholics. The Catholics saved her, and she thought she was Catholic until one day after the war, her aunt came and said, "You're Jewish, and you're coming with me to Israel." And she went to Israel, and for whatever reason, she wouldn't talk about it. She didn't get along with her aunt, and she was raised on a kibbutz, and she ended up in the Israeli army. And that's where my father went to Israel, met her, married her, and brought her back here where the streets were paved with gold. And I was raised amongst all these refugees. Some people call them survivors. I call them survivors/refugees. And my experience was unbelievable because I didn't know at the time, just like I didn't know Katz's Bakery would never be, right? I didn't know Singer's and the Triangle would be gone one day, or Grossinger's would be gone. I thought that was going to be forever. And I took it all for granted because playing cards with your parents, it was amazing. It was amazing between the Yiddish, the Polish, the German, the Hebrew, and the jokes. Lottie and Sam had a lot of friends. Ann Parks, Bella Shapiro, Irving, and the Mullers. And Eli would smoke a cigar, tell dirty jokes, and they were funny as hell. I mean, it was a great time to grow up. But anyway, I'm up here right now to just say that Lottie and Sam were like my grandparents and my parents. And I just wanted to just a tribute to them. And I'm very sorry for your loss. I don't know, people, everybody should know that you just lost your husband, your father. He was a great man too. Raphael Zayas. I always called him Raphael Grossinger, by the way. So thank you for letting me be a part of this. And thank you for letting me be a part of your family.
Oh, thank you so much.